So, hi, Bruno. I think we met the first time. It was I would say either the last Java one at Sun Microsystems or it was already Oracle. And I remember you worked either as a freelancer or for a small company, and we had lots of fun. You remember that? It was like, I would say, 8 years ago or something like this.
I think so. It was. I think it was a Java one. Maybe Latin America.
No, no, it was San Francisco for sure.
Oh,
And
it was in San Francisco. So it
yeah,
was. It was definitely 2012, and I
okay.
was at Oracle already.
Oh, okay, because we made lots of fun, and yeah, and then I met you over and over again. With I was in contact with you with Docker. You were somehow involved with Docker, and then Oracle code, and then I met you again at Devox PL, and so we always were in touch as the whole Java community. So what I would like to
Yeah.
know how you started with Java. So actually, your I just took a brief look at LinkedIn. So it's actually impressive in how many companies you already worked, and everything was Java related, right?
Indeed. Yes. I started my career as a developer already, writing Java code. That was early 2000, 2001, and back then I was learning servlet and building web interface for a desktop Java application, and I had the idea of building a web interface, and all I had at that time was servlet and JSP, and frankly, I think it works great. So had a bunch of fun, and from then, just moving forward, went through several different projects, almost all of them in the enterprise, building systems of records, working with relational databases, transactions, messaging, and so on. So it was a lot of fun for sure as a developer. And in 2012, as I said, I joined Oracle as a product manager, um, for outbound product management. That's how we would say at Oracle. Someone that is in the field doing sales enablement, talking to customers, bringing feedback into the product, and so on. And part of my role is also an evangelist, right? So Java EE a lot, WebLogic a lot, and suddenly at Oracle, I saw myself doing Docker files for Oracle products and kicking off the Oracle organization on GitHub and fostering Oracle's contributions through open source on that platform. So it was great, for sure. And still like to have a lot of fun with coding. And it's just maybe not a full time developer job, but for sure involves a lot of coding.
Well, funny story. On the road or on the way to Java One last year, I set up, I think it was Oracle XE for my client work in Docker, and I saw lots of commits from you actually in the airplane. So at the end of the flight, I had everything set up, but I said, okay, Bruno worked heavily here, so I saw lots of your Docker contributions. Yeah, how to Dockerize the Oracle XE database. Um,
Yeah, we did. We did lots of Docker files. They always started with WebLogic. That's where I invested the most. And then working with the Oracle database team, Gerald Wenzel,
mhm.
he took almost pretty much all the code that I wrote for WebLogic, and then he applied and made some changes for Oracle database, and that's when we started working together. And in the end, we were able to Dockerize lots of Oracle products that many people thought it wouldn't make sense, and it actually does because for developer purposes, it's actually amazing.
Yeah, exactly. It was a very valuable contribution actually. So what interests me with your servlets and JSPs, what was it what you built? What was your first Java project?
Um, so at that time, there is the labor office in Brazil had a system, a desktop Java Swing application to track all the bureaucracy in the labor office, and basically I realized it's crap that I have to install this desktop application, and it would be amazing if I could just go to this website and do inquiries. there were lots of features in the desktop application that would never make sense on a web interface, especially back then, with the poor integration with devices, printers, scanners, and so on. So the desktop application still made a lot of sense, and I would say it would still make a lot of sense today. But we wanted to have a way to just inquire data and the web interface for that, just to take a look at what it's in the database with a nice interface, was pretty compelling. And at that time, there was no like major framework, so just built servlets and JSPs, and all worked very fine.
Mm-hmm. I did something similar. I also used JSPs and servlets, but what I also used were Java beans. So back then, you can automatically populate Java beans back and forth directly from JSP. It was like a directive, use bean or whatever. So you could use Java beans, so the old, not enterprise Java beans, rather than the regular Java beans as data holders. So this was like a pattern back then. So interesting. Yeah, sorry.
We use lots of TLDs, remember? Like the tag libs?
Yeah, of course, JSPs. But I think as a server-side templating, I'm pretty convinced JSP should take off again. So I know without the logic, but just as a template, this is great. This is crazy fast. This is very easy to understand. And I mean, sometimes, if you're creating now React, Vue, or web standards apps, you could still use JSPs to pre-populate some data from the server. I actually use it a lot, and it works great.
I come to the conclusion, and I'm biased, and it's my opinion, but I do believe that frameworks and template machines and all of that, they pop up not because someone is trying to make something better or faster. I think it's just because people eventually don't like the existing solutions, and then they decide, I'll do my own. And then suddenly we have like 35 template engines. and that's fine, right? That's fine. And some of them actually may perform better, but I think in the great scheme of things, the traditional JSP template engine, it's really fast. You get a template, you convert. The compiler will convert into a servlet. It will just process that right away. And I find that super simple and easy to do things. And yeah, I'm not sure why people stopped doing that. I'm pretty sure
it was overused, because they implemented the whole business logic in JSP. This was the problem. It was just exaggerated.
Right.
Now they have the bad name. This is the problem. So
yeah, that's so true.
And if you started in the year 2000, which Java version was it? You can remember? JDK 1.2 probably, right?
I think it was 1.3 already.
Okay.
And I think I started at 2001, to be more precise.
Yeah.
But I'm sure I started with Java 1.3.
Okay.
I mean, I wish I had an age to be able to write code with Java 1.2 or 1.1, but I was too young.
Okay. So I didn't recognize that they are so young. So it's amazing. So I saw that your LinkedIn. It's like you probably started with JDK 01 or something,
Yeah, almost.
Almost. And what's interests me, because it's always interesting, why you started with Java at all and not, let's say, PHP? Why Java?
Okay, so the reality is it was not necessarily by choice, not because I wanted to learn Java. At that time, I had the opportunity to work in this project for the labor office as an intern, and I would learn programming. Right, there was one of the engineers was actually a teacher at the university, and he was basically teaching Java. He was learning Java and teaching Java at the same time, and he was already way advanced in Java programming language. And I thought, hey man, can you teach me this thing? And I would love to help in this project. And it wasn't necessarily by choice. I think it was more like I saw an opportunity and I took it. And I'm glad that I took it because considering the entire career path that I had, I think that was the smartest choice I've ever made.
Yeah. But it's really bad answer, I would expect you would say something. I was fascinated by that, and I liked the Duke or whatever. And now you're saying, okay, I just did it because
It's
I had to. So we
okay.
should cut it out, from our podcast.
All right, next time I'll paint it differently for sure.
Yeah, we should really call this section. Very good. Okay, so and you are from Brazil, right?
Yes, that's
Yeah.
right.
So and the people from Brazil has special relation with Java. So it was always noticeable at Java 1. So if someone said Brazil, so this was a huge shouting. So they liked, I think, Java because it was open source and somehow open, right? This is actually the main, I don't know, popularity of Java in Brazil.
Yeah, there was back then by the time I think if I remember correctly, it was Bruno Souza
Exactly.
and the group of So Java and some engineers at some of the banks in Brazil who were using Java heavily. They made a huge push to Sun Microsystem to open source Java,
Mm-hmm.
and not many people know, the idea of open sourcing Java, it did come from Brazil,
I didn't knew
and
this. Okay.
and the, just the idea, right? But not it wasn't just the idea, but also the market need. As I said, banks in Brazil were wanted to see this because they had invested a lot. They wanted to make sure that their systems would be future proof, and they made a huge push together with Bruno Souza to get this thing done. And Bruno advocated heavily, and he succeeded. So I think we should all thank Brazilians, the Java community in Brazil, for the success of open source Java.
Yeah. This is what I noticed. They have very special relation with open source and Java. And Bruno Souza, of course, we have to thank him for lots of things. And at Sun Microsystems back then, I think it was Rich Green, right, who then moved the open sourcing forward of Java. So I remember some keynotes at Java 1.
Yeah, I think so. I don't have that part of
Okay.
events in my mind, but I agree. I think you're right.
Mm-hmm. So, and then you started with Oracle, and I remember we have lots of conversation about, some conversation about WebLogic and Java E. And I met you again last year at Oracle Code, which was an unusual conference for Oracle, naming something Code, because usually they were more like a business conferences. You always make fun of it. It's like, okay, now let's do some Oracle Code. So I met you in London, and you and Steve Chin, you had a great how it's called a trailer for the conferences. So it was, I would say, quite a success. So in London was full. And I was in Prague, was also very well received and attended. And then surprisingly, or unsurprisingly, you end up, yeah, I tell you why, unsurprisingly. You started at Microsoft, and I actually was not surprised at all. And I can tell you why before you say anything. So for me, is Microsoft right now very similar how Sun was, I would say, at the beginning of Java. It's like, the open company with lots of open source movement and experimentations and Visual Studio Code and Java in the clouds and Java evangelist at Microsoft. This is from the outsider point of view. This is my perception of Microsoft right now. Is it somehow true or isn't, or?
This is extremely true. I've been at the company for 6 months, and first of all, I appreciate your comments. Yeah, lots of folks got it surprisingly. Some folks, some folks had the moment of surprising for a couple seconds, and then they had the aha moment. Okay, not that surprising because when people see what Microsoft is doing, it makes sense to have Java evangelists, and I wouldn't even say Java evangelists. I would say developer advocates, because for me, there is a slight difference in there, and I can talk about that later. Microsoft does a lot of open source now. That is absolutely true. It started with enabling open source on Azure. We saw SQL Server running on Linux. We saw uh, um, .NET being open sourced completely. At least, well, .NET Core is completely open source. .NET, the full framework, some parts are still not. Um, but I think it's a journey for the group, for that group. Visual Studio Code, completely open source. Many of the extensions that Microsoft writes for Visual Studio Code are open source. Um, in terms of like Azure engineering, lots and lots of stuff are being open source, including even Azure services. For example, Service Fabric. It's an Azure offering, and you can actually download the code from GitHub, and you can run Service Fabric wherever you want. Very, very much similar to OpenShift, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So open source became part of the culture of the company. I was surprised. I was last week. I was in Redmond, and I had a meeting with the product. Listen to this. I had a meeting with a person who is responsible for Jenkins on Azure.
Mm-hmm.
And Jenkins is an open source project, and there is a person fully dedicated to manage documentation for Jenkins, partnership with CloudBees, integration with different Azure services and Azure and Microsoft products, and all of that. There is a person fully dedicated to make sure it works well, and that is just to exemplify how much Microsoft cares about open source, how much Microsoft understands and see the importance of it. And this person, I asked, okay, what is the roadmap for Jenkins on Azure? And then this person said, oh, just go to GitHub and you can see the roadmap over there. Oh, interesting. So basically the roadmap of everything Jenkins on Azure, anyone can see, comment, contribute, provide ideas, feedback, help prioritize, and so on. That's just an example of how much the culture has changed towards open source. And for me, that is amazing because Java and open source are tied together extremely well and for a long time, and that won't change ever.
But what we have to say is it only works because the Microsoft CEO just refactored everything, and I think you can be only successful with open source because Microsoft earns a lot of money with cloud services. So I mean, it makes sense. So now it makes sense. Before they earned money with Windows and Visual Studio, so it was a complete different company, right?
I think for a cloud, it's not about making money by selling products, right?
No, services.
Cloud business is about subscription. It's about a stream of revenue and customers that trust the company, trust the product, and consume that product in a continuous basis.
Exactly.
And that requires a full shift in how the company operates, how the company does business. And for that, yes, you definitely need a leader that will say, guys, let's review the way we do things, and let's make sure that we are successful and our customers are successful on the long term. It's not just about, here's a version of the product, buy this version and goodbye. I think in the cloud business, that relationship is constant. You have to always be there with your customers. And if the customer wants open source, we need to give them open source. And we are doing that very successfully.
And it is hard to tell, but to express that. But what I think about this is what companies should do. The clients should be dependent on Microsoft services without being dependent on them. So you should be dependent on the quality of the of cloud services, but not depending on the APIs, for instance. And this is why I think this is the way to go. To be as open as possible, and the higher quality, the better. Because if you deliver good service, the clients will just stay with you and you will earn your money. So there's actually no need to introduce proprietary stuff, just to make your clients depending on your products. And as you say, in long term, such a thing could win. And this reminds me again with the whole, Java and Java E strategy. But the difference is back then, Sun didn't have any, services in their clouds. They had the grid, but they were not able to sell it. So this was the problem.
Yeah, it's in the cloud business, the way I see it, I think open source is extremely important. Open standards are nice, but if you don't have an open source implementation, what's the point of having an open standard?
Yeah.
So it needs a balance. But eventually, companies, and not only Microsoft, but cloud vendors will eventually come up with services that are not easily exchangeable, not because they want not to be, but because the nature of the service does not allow. And in those services, I think there is still an opportunity for customers to take advantage, but not necessarily be extremely locked in. And if the service provides value, that's great. If not, well, that's just business. And eventually, as the investments progress, I think there is always an opportunity to take something and make it open source. The reason I'm saying this is because, well, the reality is there are some services that are not based on open source. There are some services that don't have its engine open sourced, and not only on Microsoft, but all the cloud vendors suffer from this. But I think eventually customers will realize, and the vendors will realize, open source is important, and it's just a matter of time. So I'm very positive about it, and I agree with you. The customers will always prefer to invest in technologies that they can trust the vendor based on the quality, on the customer service, maybe on the price, and for sure the ecosystem and integrations that that vendor provides on top of that open source technology.
And
If the
trust.
vendor
And
and trust,
trust. Yeah, trust is very important.
absolutely, and trust. So if those checkpoints are marked, I think that vendor is successful. The customers of that vendor will be successful, and the industry will thrive as we always want it to be.
How long you are at Microsoft? Half a year?
Half year. That's right. 6 months.
Yeah, this is remarkable because I have now an email from you. This is April the 23rd with a one-liner. Hi, Microsoft would like to join the Jakarta EE working group as a participant member. Best regards, Bruno Borges.
Yes, that is right.
Cool. Was
like
it your idea?
3 months. I think the idea here is really to be part of the conversation. First of all, we want to follow what is going on and be able to help where we can help right away. So for Jakarta EE, initially we have one person from our marketing group in the marketing committee of Jakarta EE to help drive that effort, the message out. But not just that, on the engineering side, we are in conversations with some of the vendors in trying to identify ways that we can contribute even further to ensure two things. One, Jakarta EE is successful, and two, Jakarta EE is successful on Azure. Because we do have customers that have made huge investments in the platform, in the Java EE platform. And we want to make sure that these customers are successful on Azure with their previous choice. And that requires participation, and that's what we want to do.
Exactly. So I have also such customers which are extremely interested in Asia and ask me, whether Java EE or Jakarta EE would work on Asia. So sure, it's not directly supported right now, but Kubernetes and Docker is, so we could actually run whatever we like.
Exactly. Yeah.
On that note, what I think is, which I always wondered why Sun or Oracle never did it actually. If you consider, I would say, a pragmatic part of Java EE. Let's say we have just servlets or servlet JSPs, forget it about, so as REST services or JAX-RS. JAX-RS, let's say CDI, some transactions, not to mention EJBs. I would put EJBs, but if you don't like, then don't use EJBs. You could do a little bit CDI. JPA, probably not always necessary, but you have, I think, Cosmo DB and you have even JDBC drivers, or you could even use JPA. And what you could do then is you could make the application server invisible. Let's say we have Asia service, and behind the scenes you would get Tomi, Payara, or whatever. And then I would just ship a war, and then you care about running the application. So it's like OpenShift or Fabric in the cloud. And this is not far away from function as a service, right? So the only difference to me is that the function as a service is just one endpoint and not five. And I think this should fly. I mean, this is a little bit problematic with developers because this would be the most boring technology ever because you just focus on business logic and there were no way to experiments. But to get something done, this could be a good idea, right?
Um, it is a great idea. I think even from the beginning, or not necessarily from the beginning, but when Java EE became extremely popular, we always had these wish of writing some piece of Java EE code and just deploy anywhere. And at that time, most developers didn't have access to application servers. They would just ship the WAR file or the ER file to someone that would eventually deploy that. So I could say that people were already doing serverless development at that time because here's my code, just run it, right? That was
Exactly. Yeah.
the model. But um, I think Java EE as a platform, and that's where I hope Jakarta EE fixes. There are too many blank spaces in the specifications and the way the runtimes are implemented. And I'm talking only about the runtime. If we think close to if we look closely to how developers work with Java EE, the developer experience is very different between the different implementations. Uh, Native plugins are not consistent. IDE support is not consistent. Templates and so on. I think there's a lot of space for normalizing how people do Java EE or hopefully in the future Jakarta EE development. Tooling support, making sure that my runtime uh, differentiates with the other runtime, with the competitor runtime based on the same criteria that we established just minutes ago on cloud services, um, based on quality, trust, customer service, and not necessarily on features. I think if Jakarta EE can succeed on that, I think it will thrive even as a serverless platform for Java applications. Um, I think my point is there is a lot of opportunity for Jakarta EE to become that, and I think it's already possible today. If we look at microprofile and how people can deploy microprofile applications, I think it's doable. Just requires someone to step up and build something using the existing technologies, and then maybe innovate on top of that.
Yeah. Why why I still stick with Java E because I do Java as long as you do, a little bit longer, but I'm actually I find the whole experiments at the beginning of the project, picking the best of breed framework, whatever, I would have to say extremely boring. At the end of the day, it would be probably 2% faster or slower, and if you exaggerate, you create a unique snowflake which will only work in your environment, and no one will know how it actually was glued together. And with Java E, it's very similar to open source because you have always the same APIs. Your source code looks complete, always the same, and this is pretty portable between application servers. So we have Open Liberty, Whitefly, Payara, and Tommy, and the source code is portable between the runtimes. The only problem is, of course, the persistence if you use specific Hibernate or Eclipse Link stuff. But everything else works really well. And this is why I have the hope that instead, creating all the runtime over and over again, cloud vendors will say, look, we implement, this is the base, is like our business operating system. Just put your war, and behind your scenes, the Kubernetes or whatever will kick in and just distribute everything. This will be the next step. It was like, it was like the facade to serverless, something like this. And and this is what I always found interesting, that this was somehow ignored, and probably because, as you said, the old templates and the frameworks. What I actually do in project is I delete all the crap. So in most projects, we don't have not even a Maven plugin. We just have one dependency, a simple Maven build, and this is crazy fast. And now it comes. The startups love it. So if I show this to startup how efficient it is, they really love it because they are productive with it. And seasoned Java E developers hate it because there is nothing else to do. You start your project, and from day one, from the first minute, you have focus on business logic. This is the problem.
Yeah, it's I think serverless platform, the most interesting thing about serverless platforms is the ability of writing a piece of code that will be triggered based on events.
Yeah.
And that logic, you can literally focus on the logic. I mean, it's like ETL systems, that's great. Messaging systems, that's great. Even database events or triggers. In the past, you would write a trigger in a PL SQL. Yeah, maybe you want to, or you could scale better if you had that trigger, depending on the use case, of course. Sometimes the use case for database triggers is actually, I need fast access to the data. So that's better to be located in the database. But if the companies want to standardize or just want to focus the key use cases to a serverless platform, that model is extremely fascinating, and it scales really well, not just technically but economically. For Java EE, for Jakarta EE, the model is there already. I think it's just I think what's lacking and what was always lacking in the Java EE platform was proper marketing and messaging of the capabilities of the platform, what could be done with it, and in the productization of the platform, how to shape the platform in a way that people can see, this is an interesting technology, this is an interesting product that I can actually invest and implement this, and this use case. So maybe Jakarta EE now is the best place to deliver that message, and I'm happy that we have a person in marketing contributing to it, and I'll make sure that I have a close look on that.
Cool. And even Jakarta and Microprofile, they're a little bit independent, but I have even more hope with Microprofile because they are extremely fast. They delivered 4 releases in 2017, and they do really pragmatic stuff like liveness and readiness probes with health metrics and configuration, open API for Swagger, and I ignored Microprofile for a long time until I saw, this was actually interesting, that Payara 5, the stock server, and OpenLiberty, they are shipping the Java 8 stuff plus Microprofile, which is great. So what it actually means, you can use the Java 8 basic stuff plus the Microprofile goodness without being forced to use complete different runtime. This is what I do, and this just takes off. So if you have Java 8 app, let's say CRUD, you put a metered annotation, a single annotation on a method, and you get Prometheus integration for free. So if you are running on OpenShift or your Microsoft Fabric, and you can configure your system with environment entries, you say config property name, and you are configured. So this is extremely productive. And the cool story is for clouds. Because we have a Docker-like environments, the wars which we ship are tiny. So no kidding. So in most of my projects, the wars are 300 kilobytes because they only comprise business logic. There's just business logic inside. There is no infrastructure. So, pushing this to the clouds is extremely fast because in the private Docker registry in the clouds, we already have the runtime. So this is our runtime, but we just push it every 3 months. And what we are shipping 50 times a day is a tiny war, which is crazy fast. This is actually the most productive environment I saw per accident because we have the deployment model.
You know what would be super cool to see, like a bandwidth benchmark. How much bandwidth does it cost to ship microprofile applications in a cloud environment? Fair, but still, let's say we do 50 deployments per day, or even about 48 deployments per day, a deployment every 30 minutes. And how much bandwidth does that cost, considering the runtime image is already on the registry, but you have to build your project and then ship that to your pipeline and then to production? How much bandwidth does that cost compared? Maybe not necessarily, maybe we don't need to compare, but with traditional Java EE Docker images where the runtime goes with the image every time versus taking advantage of the existing image, the base image on the registry. I think that comparison would be interesting because you could also compare that with other technologies, but I think the point being made here is
But
what is the best practice
yeah,
for deploying applications in a Docker environment?
actually, what all cloud native projects, we did it that way that the runtime was already in the clouds and we just always ship just the war. On my blog, there's an interview with startup managing taxi companies with thin wars and Java E. It's like one of my attendees created something aside, and I asked him about the size, and it says 5 megs is the whole war with Vardin and the UI, which it doesn't actually count. But around 800K of the total size is my code. So the business logic comprises 800K. So if this would be a JavaScript app, the war would be 800K. And I have interviews with banks, there's around 300K. So usually my war is way smaller than 1 meg. And if you push it 50 times a day, so you push at most 40 megs. And this is crazy fast. So I don't even care about the bandwidth. What I care about is the developer experience. Because I say Docker push, and this is, I did the experiments with Oracle Cloud and with Amazon Cloud, and I will do it with Azure if you like. We can prepare something. But
yeah, sure.
Yeah, so I have on my YouTube channel, so what's only lacking is Microsoft actually. And this is actually the huge added value because of the immutable structure of Docker, because the top layer is your war and everything else is on the server and only changes if we get new release of the runtime. And if the runtime would be already on Azure, let's say you will commit to a Java 8 runtime, let's say Tomy, Payara, or whatever, Open Liberty, then there will be nothing more to update. And this is what I'm talking about. This is like serverless on steroids. I actually compare it with different platforms, with different serverless platforms, and there were a way the function on that platform was way larger than the entire war of my Java E app.
Do you when you push your application? So here's a question for you.
Yes.
When you have to build the application, the Docker image from your Jenkins environment, for example, that image needs to be based on the image that is in the registry, right? So
yes, and we have the registry is layered. So the first image is this operating system in Java, then the application server inherits from the top image, and my project-specific configuration inherits from the application server image, and then this is static, and then what I do 50 times a day, my war is just one-liner, and then it inherits from the project-specific configuration. And this is crazy fast. So the build, you can go to my YouTube channel. It takes Maven build plus Docker build takes around 3 seconds at most.
And I assume that in the build machine, you have that layer already downloaded, right? So you don't need to spend that time every time. So no. Interesting. Wow. Okay.
This is already downloaded, and not only this, it only changes every 3 months. And if you're curious, go to my GitHub account. The project name is Docklands. And this is Docker images for all application services at 4 or 5 years old. And if I do something on conferences, it's usually based on Docklands. So this is exactly the structure there.
I think I've seen this project before. Yeah, I think I contributed even to it on the WebLogic stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So I tested your WebLogic image, exactly.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah.
How we went full cycle here.
Yeah, perfect. So this is because we prepared, this is the hours of preparation paid off before the podcast.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing about these industries. Sometimes we do things because we think, oh, this is cool, and this will help me with this particular use case. But then suddenly that becomes the foundation for many other ideas that people can leverage for their use cases. And I think this Docker thing is just proof of that life cycle in our industry. Very interesting to see that.
And therefore, I never saw the point, and I don't understand Uber jars, super jars, or whatever to call it. In my eyes, in cloud environment, they do not make any sense. Because you're building 50 times a day, the whole runtime, plus the business logic, also only a fraction changes. So it doesn't make any sense to me, but no one could explain why. But I got one explanation in Devox in Antwerp, and a company told me they started before Docker, and this was they planned to ship it on bare metal machines, and this makes sense to me. But in a cloud environment, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it's even in the past, right? I mean, technically, you could still do the thing that you have here with the layered images. In the past, you could still do that with versionized class path folders. You could literally. I've seen this. You would go into a server and you would see like instead of Docker image version X, you would have a class path folder version X, and then people would ship the jar file with only the application code, and then on the shell script, you would have this metadata. It'd say like, okay, my application, my jar file, which is like 30K, and to run this application, it has a dependency on this class path folder version X.
Yes.
Which contains all the libraries. So I've seen in the past people doing what you do with Docker here, just not in an extremely nice way, but the idea was there. So the fat jar, the Uber jar, I think it just simplifies a lot of things from the developer perspective, and it reduces the stress on the communication between the developer and the operations team. It just makes it easier, right? So here's my application, boom, just run it. And there's no need for metadata, no need for class path, no need for this or that. It's just like, here's my application. So
the Docker container for me is like, the Docker image is like the ultimate ear. No one cares what's inside. I'm just using application servers because they are small and extremely productive, and no one cares what's inside. So this is the difference.
Yeah. That makes total sense, and I think even for the projects that advocate for the Uber jar, I think there is an opportunity for them to implement the same concept, based on, for example, based on the POM file of a Maven project on the dependencies, you ship you build a base Docker image with that dependency tree, and then you release your jar file that does not contain all the libraries. I think it's doable, just requires some effort.
But there is another benefit of Java EE. So we only have one dependency or two. So in my modern project, also a newer project, I have one dependency to Java 8 API and one dependency to microprofile API, and both are provided. And because Jakarta or Java are complete APIs, there is no twiddling. So I just ship it that way. It never changes. So it means my microservice in Java EE, my setup is always around 60 lines of POM code at most. And there are no super POMs, no dependency management. Is that simple. And this is another thing. This is like, you can start with Java EE in 5 seconds. And this is the right way to go. There's not even plugins needed. And this is what you should investigate, because I think done it right and rename it not to Jakarta EE, right, Cloud EE or whatever, but this would take off. This has to take off because it's so lean.
Do you see an increased number of libraries around Jakarta EE in the future? For example, I was looking at microprofile APIs, and Jonathan Giles on my team, he implemented a config source.
I saw that
for Azure Key Vault. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious to understand, though, if yes, microprofile, Jakarta EE, they come with this set of APIs that implement the most common use cases and needs of an enterprise application. But eventually, in the real world, you have to integrate your application with some service. And this is the clear example of Key Vault. But I'm pretty sure other examples will surface in the short term. Aren't we going to see Java or Jakarta EE projects or microprofile projects increasing the number of dependencies on artifacts outside the basic platform APIs?
If so, they would be domain specific or business specific. I would say what's for instance, I'll give you an example. What's often needed is single sign-on security, which is not part of Java yet. So it is in Java 8, but not official. And with micro profile, for instance, right? So you can without any dependency, you can authenticate with JSON Web Token. And recently, for one of my clients, I implement solution where without any dependencies, the micro profile creates principles and roles in Java EE, but it communicates. This was on Payara project, Payara 5, which communicates with Keycloak running on Whitefly without any Keycloak dependency. And the origin idea was from Keycloak, to take Keycloak specific adapters, what I didn't like at all, because my client would be depending on specific Keycloak library, not only my client, all microservices from my client. And what I use instead, we based on standard, because Keycloak implements OAuth 2, and we need OAuth 2. So I think in 80% of all cases, you can throw away things. Actually, a huge portion of my assignments and projects is deleting stuff. As all my clients, they had really problems with complexity, over complex builds, and over modularization. And what I do is I just simplify and delete stuff. And my clients are really thankful. And in greenfield projects, we start simple. And developers really love it. I don't know whether you know, there is in Germany a magazine called Spiegel Online, and Spiegel is like New York Times, New York Times, something like this. Yeah?
Okay.
And they asked me about Java EE support because they knew me for, I don't know, 5 to 10 years. And I came in, and the developers had no idea about Java EE. And after half a year, they are extremely successful with monitoring everything. And what the developers did, they were very, very particular about dependencies. So they had to say at every iteration, okay, can we delete this? Can we delete this? What we can simplify? And I'm interviewing them right now, and they will send me the interview question. We'll publish on my blog. But the point is, they said to me, they are extremely pleased how simple there is, that they can fully focus on business logic. So what I observed, all integrations can be mostly done by REST. So for instance, Elasticsearch, you could, if you can just take your REST API and call Elasticsearch, or you can of course use Elasticsearch libraries written in Java, which behind the scenes call it via REST. So I think the REST and HTTP and JSON is the new integration protocol. And this is not always true, but as I said, in 80% of all cases, we build crazy complex Java applications without a single external dependency.
And is it that is cool in a sense, but how much effort does it take to identify a solution that does not depend on anything?
I don't think a lot of effort. You just take a look at all the you need a specific mindset. What I see what the developers do, so we have in Germany Java Magazine and Java Spectrum, so like Java magazines. And what the developers do, they read that and say, now we have reactive programming. So how to integrate reactive programming with Java EE? And they just would like to do this without any reasons. And then it escalates. So I give you an example, no kidding. So I got a contract to review 3 to 5 microservices, something like this. It was wars. How many Maven modules they built? For 5 wars. So 5 wars, 5 independent microservices. Say a number.
How many modules on? Okay, so here's the question. Let me just recap the question. The company does 5 wars. How many Maven modules they use to
implement 5 wars?
End up with? My guess is
120. I had to review 120 Maven modules, and I would implement 5 wars. And this was a typical Java project, and it escalated because they were extremely unproductive. And
there is a law.
Yeah,
there is a law in IT. Simple systems will eventually become complex systems.
Yes. And with my strategy, you should, we try at least postpone that as far as possible, delete as much as possible. But this is what I would like to tell you, that actually that the mindset should be keep systems simple, and clouds could you help with that, because if on Microsoft Azure you could say we only have this 5 APIs that is self-constraining, done, and then 80% of a project could use it, and if you need an external API, you could use it, but in 80% of our projects, they don't have to use it, right? And this works great in my world, and I'm just wondering myself why it does not happen in larger scale,
Yeah, I think it's just a lack of awareness, just lack of people knowing how to do things right. I mean, in our industry, there's so many ways to do things, so many technologies to choose from, and so many different opinions and ideas that in most cases, people will implement things with their existing knowledge and their existing opinions, and very few people will look around whenever they have a new project to build. They will hardly look around to see new ways of doing the same thing. So that's why we end up with these projects that are massive. That contains massive design problems, not only on the architecture of the system, but also in the way that the project is managed, from the source code to the CI/CD configuration to the way the artifacts are managed and the dependencies are managed and so on. So I think it's just a lack of awareness. And frankly, we should not judge, because in the end, these developers, they always have a deadline, they always have pressure, they always have, just get it done. And I think that goes back to the beauty of Java EE platform. It simplifies a lot of the choices. It simplifies a lot of the way that people do things. And maybe it's a feedback to the Jakarta EE committee, how we can have Jakarta EE deliver an opinionated development process, from source management to CI/CD to deployment to production. How can we have a consistent story, a consistent message in that flow that works with any implementation of the platform? And I goes back to the example of the Maven plugins. How can we have Maven plugins that are consistent? What I would love to see? One single Maven plugin where the implementation of the API is a configuration of the Maven plugin. Instead of using different plugins based on implementation, I just want to use a Jakarta EE plugin, and then I would choose my implementation. So I think the platform continues to have this opportunity, and I think we should all take it.
What is your next mission at Microsoft? So what are you doing right now, and what do you plan to do?
So in the short term, we are, it's conference season, right? It's like September, October, November. It's conference season, especially in Europe, and we have some engagements to do. That's just in the short term, but our advocacy is actually internal. It's making sure that the Azure service teams deliver an excellent platform for Java developers. Azure has a great story with any developer in any operating system. Pretty much half of the VMs on Azure are Linux based, and as we know, Java developers prefer to run server-side applications on Linux environments, which is totally fair. And I see there an opportunity to share that message broadly, and that is part of our story. Okay. For the advocacy, there are some items like we want to ensure that the Java SDKs of Azure services are consistent, are well produced, well documented, available on Maven Central, available on GitHub, and so on. And also that they work together when you combine them in one single project. Because the worst thing that could happen is having two Java SDKs with different versions of Log4j. So we want to make sure that the dependency tree of the SDKs are also consistent. For some services that we provide runtime, Java runtime, there are two of them right now. One is Azure Functions, our serverless platform. So you bring your jar file, and we spin up a JVM for you as part of our serverless runtime, and we choose which JVM. And I think right now we are using Azul Systems JVM.
Mhm.
I think it's Zulu. The other service that we have that comes with the Java runtime is Azure App Service. So again, you simply ship your WAR file or jar file, and we provide the runtime, and you can choose which runtime you want to play. You have the choices of Oracle JDK 8, you have Azul Systems JDK 8, and I think there is Java 7 as well from both options, from both vendors. And on top of that, if you need a web servlet container, we provide Tomcat and I think Jetty. So you can also choose that. We are still working on evaluating Jakarta EE and Java EE runtimes, and also microprofile runtimes. As I understand, microprofile is not exactly Tomcat, so it does implement other APIs that a servlet container does not. So we are looking into that as well.
Yeah, take a look at Payara 5 stock. You don't even have to look at micro. It has Java 8 and microprofile and Open Liberty. It's also interesting. And because you have Tomcat, there is a Tommy, which is just a war in a Tomcat, and you get a Java EE 7 plus support.
Yeah, we are evaluating all the core options. We are. That's why I've been blogging about Payara as an option for microprofile implementation, because we are evaluating that. We have done evaluations with Tommy and Open Liberty still in the queue, but I think once we find one that satisfies, we might stop there because time is not forever.
Yeah.
We cannot spend time forever in doing this work. And I hope we can share more details either later this year or early next year on supporting this new enterprise environments.
Yeah, this would be nice, and I would like really to evaluate that, to push something to to give you a feedback whether it is fast enough and productive enough.
Yeah, I mean, it's today you already can run, right? As you said in the beginning, you can bring Docker containers to Kubernetes. We have a service that we like to say it's a serverless Docker environment.
Mm-hmm.
It's called Azure Container Instances, and basically it's a cloud version of Docker Run. You say, hey, Azure Container Instance, run this image for me. And it provides you a DNS, it provides you an endpoint, and you can have a web application up and running in seconds or a couple minutes.
This is interesting, so I would try that.
Yeah, it's super cool. You should definitely try it. There is an article I'll share with you, and maybe you can link from this podcast.
Yeah.
Two articles that push Docker image using microprofile applications to Azure in two different ways. One is on top of Azure App Service that supports custom Docker images on top of the provided runtimes that I mentioned before. But there is Azure Container Instance that allows you to do that, just Docker run my image. And Kubernetes service, I'll leave it there, because once people understand Kubernetes runs Docker, you can run whatever you want inside a Docker container. So I'll send you those two links for sure. I think they're very worth trying on Azure.
On that note, where people can find you on the internet and about the Azure resources, whatever you'd like to share right now.
There are three ways to find me. One is my email. So it's bruno.borges@microsoft.com. Feel free to send an email with some questions, clarifications, ideas, feedback, rants. Feel free to do whatever you want. Just don't send me spam. I appreciate that. For more real-time conversation, if you think that is what it pleases you, you can find me on Twitter. It's Bruno Borges. And you can also find me on LinkedIn. I also like to talk to people over LinkedIn because it is a more professional work environment, social network, and to discuss technical things, to discuss use cases, maybe a customer visit. I think that can be a great platform for that. So you can find me on LinkedIn. You just search for Bruno Borges, Microsoft. You should find me over there.
Yeah, perfect. So, Bruno, thank you for the interview. And in one point in time, let's say next year, if your Jakarta EE is everywhere in Microsoft, on Microsoft clouds, we should talk again about that.
We should definitely do so. Yes, absolutely.
So, thank you.
And thank you for having me. Appreciate it.